Welcome to the Moulding Private Practice Show, where we help healthcare practitioners in private practice keep true to their purpose and build a life of mastery by providing the knowledge, skills, and tools to bring their dreams to life. In this episode of the show, we speak to Emma Nel about being a counselling psychologist and everything private practice management related. Emma Nel, welcome to the show. So we're really glad to have you on board and speaking about being a psychologist and everything private practice management related. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
No, I always love the stories. I don't realize I would enjoy, doing these episodes as much as, as I do. Because when it first started, I always thought, there's definitely a gap in terms of people understanding how people became or came to be in the healthcare profession, firstly. And secondly, I joke that I say that's almost like the private practice part is so difficult. And yet people go into that, in many ways, kind of blindfolded. And I find that quite interesting as well. But I want to ask, and I always like asking this, but, when you were quite young, people always ask you, and it's always like these most embarrassing situations because it's always at a family gathering or something. And they always ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? So what did a young Emma Nel say she wanted to be?
A variety of things. Definitely not a psychologist.
Okay.
I think for many years I sort of pictured myself. When I was very young, I thought I loved school stationery. I thought I was gonna own a stationery shop.
That's so cool.
Thank goodness that didn't happen.
Mm.
But even in high school, if I look at my journey to becoming a psychologist, I'd say it's quite unusual. In school, I really liked maths and science, which is generally not what your typical psychologist enjoys. And I used to go for career assessments. And when I got my results, the psychologist was so insistent. He was like, medicine is for you. It is the only option. You will not suit anything else. And he was so insistent. I went and I got a second opinion. And I was like, what do you think? And again, medicine, only option. That's the one for you. And of course, my parents happy to hear this. They want to encourage that. But it didn't feel right for me. I never had that natural want to do medicine. And I think it's such a demanding degree. If you don't have that passion or desire to do it, I'd probably be very miserable. So when it got time to actually choosing what to study, I decided to do a Bachelor of Science. So I did a Bachelor of Science. It was a triple major degree. So my one major was human physiology. So I did that as a backup. If I want to go into medicine, that'll let me transfer over. And then my second major was genetics. I thought that would be maybe where I would end up and my love for science. And then psychology was just with it. And I thought that was interesting. I'm sure that'll be fun. And this was at the University of Pretoria. And so, yeah, when I started out, really did not think I would end up in this field. And I was surrounded by a lot of people trying to get into medicine. And I could see their passion, their desire. And I just did not have that. It wasn't me. And then I started volunteering and hanging out with more psychology students. And I started volunteering at organizations that are more, psychologically based. And then I felt it. Then I felt that desire that I was seeing in all these people trying to get into medicine. I felt that want to get into psychology. And that's when I started working hard. If anyone's familiar with the process of becoming a psychologist, it's very challenging academically. There's a very tough selection process that you have to go through. But as soon as I felt that passion, then I was prepared to put in all the work that the whole process takes to become a psychologist. And I've never really looked back. Of course, I think as part of many psychologists' journey is their own experience with mental health challenges, either in their family or personally. I think having gone through it or seen it happen around me, it is a great motivator to want to help or get into that field. So definitely a bit of a stray, but very happy with where I ended up.
Yeah, I love that story, and the responses have been like incredible. The clinical psychologists that I mentioned that we spoke to about gender identity. she wanted to become a rugby player. And I was like, I would have never guessed that. I would have lost that bet every single time, if you asked me to guess what, her one would have been. But your one as well, interesting. But you know what I can relate to is there's a certain smell that's in a stationery shop or in a bookshop. And I love it as
Mm,
well. I mean, I can spend, there's
definitely.
something cool about stationery and books that,
Oh, definitely.
that, like even when I was at university and like, going to buy textbooks, most people like didn't like that. I loved it. I loved that, getting a new book and like, flipping the pages, and there's like there's a certain smell to that. I still find it amazing. Like even now, exclusive books, we could spend hours there.
Oh, was
Um,
definitely.
yeah, so it would have been a good choice actually. I don't think there would have been much money, but there's, well, depending, maybe a school shop. Definitely they you're forced to buy the textbooks, or a university shop. But what I liked about what you said, and it's maybe, this is obviously not the forum for it, but there's something about how people perceive the psychology subject that's wrong. And I see
Mm,
it, at varsity. I mean, psychology was always a filler subject. It was like commerce as well.
100%.
It's like when you
Mm,
didn't know what else to do just to finish up your degree, you chose
mm,
psychology. And I found that's, it's so interesting because I mean, I mean, if I had to do it again, I would say, like go into psychology because it's such a rewarding profession. It seems. I mean, it has its, we'll go down the negative aspects of it now in terms of boundaries and limits and stuff like that. But it's a really interesting one, and I think you're probably the second person that I've spoke to that said you came from a very science orientated background, because most people are not. I mean, even my wife,
mm,
came more from the arts background, or the humanities, I think they call that. But the other person was a psychologist from New Zealand, and he said the same thing. He said he was actually very, and I could be wrong, but it was definitely very science orientated.
mm,
And I want to say maths or physics, as in at university level. But and he said the same thing. He said he stumbled upon psychology, and it was like, that was it for him. Like it almost married the two aspects, because I think that that's what people don't realize. Psychology is like quite
mm,
analytical. It's not just this humanities thing, because to be able to solve problems, and
mm.
this is solving problems on the next level because you're solving human problems, is not trivial. Is that what helped you, or what helped convince you as well?
Definitely. And I think I agree with you so much when you're saying how psychology is maybe not viewed accurately. And I would say the same actually goes for medicine as well. Everyone seems to think if you've got certain marks, medicine's the way for you. And what I realized, as my idea of psychology is it's a form of medicine. It may not be prescribing medication specifically, but it's a helping field. And I think that's what we also need to wrap our head around is as health practitioners, there's such a variety of different ways you can help. Every single health practitioner is in a helping profession, but many people are steered towards medicine as this main goal. And medicine's such a wonderful career, but it is not for everyone. It's a very tough course, and there are so many other ways of helping people. For example, I'm very glad I don't have to touch people. I think that's the
Mhm.
pro of my field. I get to help, I get to guide, I get to really play a role in someone's life, but I don't have to physically touch them. Little things like that. So I feel like I don't think the career assessments were that off. I think I've always wanted to heal and help and be in that kind of field. But I think that the method of doing that was maybe not 100% accurate.
Mm. I'm sure there was a savior for you during the COVID times, because then you definitely don't have to get anywhere close to people. But yeah, that's actually quite funny. In terms of the career as well, I mean, like getting into psychology, you touched on it a little bit just now, and it never fails to amaze me how people talk about that selection process. Did you find that quite? And for anyone that doesn't know, I mean, so to get into honors was pretty trivial previously. I think now it's a selection process as well. But if your academics were good, then you got into honors. But from honors to masters, like not a chance. I mean, like people struggled. How was your process?
I think you raise a good point, because I think this is also why we need to look at psychology differently. Many people study it as a filler subject or as something they could get into or as it sounds interesting. And that's when I go back to career guidance. I really recommend that anyone who wants to study psychology have another major, study it with something else, have almost, I want to say, a backup plan. Because if we look at the field of psychology, it is so hard to recommend it to people because of the journey it takes. When you're actually through it, it's wonderful, and it's a rewarding field. And I'm so grateful to be where I am. But the actual process of getting there is very, very challenging. I must say, me on a personal level, I was very lucky. I managed to get in my first time. So I went straight through the process. I went from my BSc at Tux. I then did my honors in psychology at UJ. And then I went straight into my master's in counselling psychology at the University of the Free State.
Yeah.
So I was very lucky it went that way. That is not the general case. And I just want to emphasize that, because for many people, it's okay if you don't get in the first time. It's okay to not get in the second time. It doesn't mean that you're not going to be a wonderful psychologist one day. It is a process that takes a bit of patience. But I think for anyone who's looking into coming into this field, be aware of the process and be aware of what you're signing up for. Because we have many people who get to honors and then they suddenly realize the massive task of getting into masters. And I know WITS now tells their first year students, if you have a lecture hall of first year psychology students of 2,000, 12 of those, 100 will maybe get in across the country. It's less than a 1% chance of getting in at times. So I know at my university, there was, at University of the Free State, there was 400 applicants for the clinical and counselling programs, and 12 got in. So that works out to be a 4% success rate. So I just think we can't ignore that when it comes to people going through. And with regards to the actual selection process, it's a very intensive process. At times, it's a whole week. I went for interviews at the University of KwaZulu-Natal and the University of the Free State. Some of these interviews can be very tough. Some of the psychologists do push you, and there is reasons they do what they do, but it can be very tough to experience and go through, and it can be very emotionally taxing. I think it's the only career where you're asked such personal questions and really asked to talk about your deepest, darkest traumas in front of a whole panel of psychologists. So yes, it is a tough process. And even once you actually get in, if anyone's familiar with the masters, it's a 2 or 3 year program, but in that space, you do a full academic year, a full internship, and completing a master's dissertation and board exams, and sometimes a community service year. It's a lot. Many people have to add on another year. It's a tough process.
Well, firstly, congrats, for getting in first time, because that doesn't seem to be the consensus amongst most practitioners. And what you said is so significant in terms of maybe having a backup plan, because I think most psychologists don't realize that. So you got to, honors level, and I think it was the same with my wife as well. So you get to honors level and you got psychology and maybe another humanities subject. What do you do with that? So how do you go into the job market? Because as you said, and I agree, just keep on doing it. Don't think of it as a failure. But now you're waiting 2 years. What do you do in the meantime? What job do you get? And because you've got a 4-year degree, very qualified, 2 degrees under your belt, but normally it's like HR or admin, and it's like, and those are your options. And even to get into an HR position, that's sometimes you might be seen as overqualified, because now why would you want to go into HR? And so it's a challenge. The combination I thought would be amazing would be if obviously the person was inclined that way, would be marketing and psychology. Since we started our business, I got a newfound respect for marketing, but marketing with a psychology, major would be amazing. I don't find many people with that, but that would be pretty cool.
Definitely. I think it is a nice combination. That's why I'm grateful for if I struggled, I could have gone back to genetics. Yes, I think having another major is really, really helpful. I think also to consider alternative degrees. Many people aren't aware of the B Psych program. And that is a 4-year qualification offered that when you finish it, it's I want to say it's the equivalent of having an undergrad and an honors, and it allows you also have practical exposure. So then you're allowed to register as a registered counselor afterwards. So sometimes that can be actually a safer way of doing it, because you're doing the same sort of route, you're at the same time, but you're finishing being able to actually register with the HPSA as a registered counselor. That means you're able to open your own practice, claim for medical aid, and if you still want to further it, you can then apply for masters to become a psychologist. So I quite like that route, and I think it's often under sort of valued. What you can do is also a BPsych equivalent, and that just covers basically the honors bit. You still have an undergrad in psychology, then you do the BPsych equivalent, which is a 1.5 years, so it gives you practical experience, and then you can register as a counselor. So I think we often underestimate these alternatives, and they can be sometimes a bit safer. There's no perfect fix, and it's really sad how many honors students, given my age, many of my contemporaries are still trying to get into masters, and they're struggling to find jobs left, right, and center. Even within HR, it's becoming a bit oversaturated. Really, really challenging, and they're forced to do things that they don't actually want to do. Teaching, other fields. It's definitely a problem that we need to reassess. But I think that's why if we don't give correct career guidance from the beginning, if we don't know what we're setting ourselves up for, if we haven't considered the alternative options, if we don't have a backup plan, that's really what I want to recommend to anyone, because we all, and sometimes the most capable people don't get in. So even if we know we have all the qualities and you could be a great psychologist, unfortunately, you still could not get in. So I think keeping that in mind, don't give up hope if it's something you really want, but be prepared. Yes.
And I think, what makes it quite difficult, Emma, is like that if you were academically inclined and you were, because like they say the same thing with accountants, like the same with psychology. In your first year, accounting class, you got like 2,000 people there, and they tell you, like by the end of 7 years, a handful is going to become chartered accountants. But that process is purely academic related and work related. Like if you put in the work and you get the academic results. What interests me about psychology is that it's not about that. It's not about the academics. You could have amazing academics at honors level, but you don't get into masters. And I don't know how maybe that's what the prep you were talking about, like preps you for in life, is that must be a huge psychological whack, in terms of saying, actually, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough the first time, I'm not good enough the second time. And that must be quite frustrating. So for any psychologist that's a psychologist, I mean, I would say amazing, because you went through that whole process and you got out of that, and you're now a psychologist, and no one can ever take that away from you. So I think, as you said, career guidance. I love what you said about the BPsych. I didn't actually know that. I knew the option to, for registered counselors, we've got, many clients like that. And we actually have one client now that's in Ireland, and she's doing a psychology, doctorate. And, but, that was like the steps. But I would, if I was advising someone as well, I'm not allowed to do that, but, I would definitely go with the BPsych degree, because that makes a lot of sense. What you logically just said, that makes complete sense. You get private practice, you get to work in the field, and at some point, hopefully get into the master's program, and that's perfect.
I do want to hesitate. The only concern with the BPsych is it's not readily available. So most universities don't offer it. It's only mainly offered by some of the private universities. But I actually lecture some of the BPsych students at the moment. So I've really found such value in the program. And also, because it's offered by private institutes, it is very expensive. But I do want to say, while it is more expensive in the start off, I think you end up saving money in the long run, because you don't have 2-3 years where you're stuck not being able to do anything. You can earn an income.
Okay. But so I didn't know that as well. So that's very useful. But so if you did go through a traditional university like UJ or UP, or KZN, or UKZN, I mean, how would you then go into the registered counselor route? Because I think that's an important point. So you got to your third year honors, a third year psychology. How would then almost you prep yourself to go into a registered counselor route?
So then you would do the B-Psych equivalent program. So it's just a year and a half, and it kind of replaces your honors. Some people will already have an academic honors and then do it because they maybe didn't realize, but you can do it instead of doing an academic honors. So you can go straight from your undergrad, your 3-year degree, then do the B-Psych equivalent. It takes a year and a half because you'll also have practical exposure that you wouldn't have if you did a traditional honors. And then you'll write the board exams. So that is an option, again, only offered at certain universities. And I want to say it is quite a pricey program. Another B-Psych equivalent. So when we talk about a B-Psych, we talk about registered counselors, but you also have psychometrists. And those are the individuals who do psychometric tests and things like that. So that is a 6-month course, which is a nice option if you want after honors. So the requirement for that is that you have an honors, or you'd have to have an honors where you covered psychometric assessments, and then you could apply for this program. It's offered at some of the mainstream, I want to say, or traditional universities like UJ, Nelson Mandela University, Stellenbosch University. Again, a very pricey program at 6 months, and then after that you write the board exam, and then you can become a psychometrist. And as a psychometrist, you can also, you're HPSA registered, you have a medical aid BHF number, practice number. Often psychometrists work under psychologists and help them with their psychometric testing, but you can also open your own practice. So there are options. Unfortunately, it does feel very limited for anyone going through the process.
I think you're the first person that actually mentions the psychometrist route, and I actually know a few people in private practice. I think the other one with the psychometrist route, which is quite interesting, is that you can actually go into corporate as well, because there's certain big corporates that have, they're big enough that they're almost continuously doing psychometric testing, for staff and new candidates and stuff like that. So there's that option there. Which is similar to what Discovery is doing, with healthcare practitioners now. It's almost like getting them into corporate, for their risk assessments and stuff like that. So yeah, that's a really cool model. Thanks very much. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's the first time that we covered that in so much of detail, in terms of just, during the studying phase, how you can almost set yourself up for success. I'm a huge fan in that, almost like having a backup plan. For me, if it wasn't IT or software development, it was going to be accounting. I'm glad I didn't do that, but I would have hated it, knowing what I know now. But yeah, all good. But I think also look at that, if you're inclined that way, marketing is a really, really cool subject, because it covers that same thing that psychology does, which is that creative plus analytical part. So, if you like those aspects and you that way inclined, I think it's a really cool, combination. And then after you qualified, how did you go straight into working? How did that play out?
After I qualified, I am quite recently qualified. I sort of jumped into a lot of things at once. I did most of my training at children's homes. That's where I completed my internship. That's where I've really developed this passion for children, adolescents. At the same time, I think something that people don't really talk about is, as psychologists, we're also judged by our clients. And I think if I look at my own life right now, I'm probably perceived to be very young and perceived to maybe not have a lot of knowledge, not a lot of experience, which is not a totally inaccurate assumption given certain things. But and every psychologist may face it. You may be viewed as too old, you may be viewed as this way. So it's a universal thing. It's something we also face in our work. But I think right now you can also use it to your advantage. I'm working with younger people who maybe feel like they can still identify with me and maybe still understand what the teenagers like, or I'm not too old for kids, but kids will say I'm 47, so they have no gauge. So that's where I really developed that sort of love for kids and adolescents. But at the same time, now that I'm fully qualified and everything, I've gone into 3 areas. One is lecturing, which has always been a passion of mine. I love giving back to the community, helping people going through this process, just because it is such a tough process. I love being a mentor for people trying to get through this process. I'm part of a few mentorship programs where we're trying to help students get into masters, get through the process. I'm also part of a big group practice that's a private practice in Rivonia, which has been so wonderful because it's exposed me to such a variety of clients. I'm working a lot with adults and couples, which I'm really, really enjoying. So I'm seeing the sort of what it's like in a big group private practice, how it's run, the benefits, maybe some of the challenges. And then on the side, I've also opened my own practice. So this is where it's my clientele, my way of doing things. So it's kind of a mixture of seeing what it's like when you do it all on your own, when you have the help of a bigger practice. But I'm grateful because it's given me a steady income, because as we've chatted about, or as people struggle with in their open practice, is the sense of income and having a really stable income. So having different sources of income has really given me that financial freedom, and taken off the pressure of trying to build a massive practice straight away.
I like that. I like how you're doing it as well. I mean, it really resonates with me because I'm that kind of like mentality as well. You want to almost like hedge your bets, around certain things. But I love how you're doing it, and I think at some point, obviously, you will pick a route, and because from a time point of view, I think it does. I think at the moment you can obviously do all of those, but
It is a bit difficult at times.
yeah, but I think at some point, when family comes along and stuff like that, you do have to start saying, actually, I do need to almost prioritize, and then people do pick one or two, to kind of keep, yeah. But I love that, and also from the experience point of view, like you're saying, how do you get the experience of working in a group practice, or knowing that you actually want to run a group practice at some stage in your life, if you don't know what that is? And I think that's the key thing. I like what you said about like when people perceive like you're not having this experience level to be able to maybe help them, and I think psychologists kind of helped me with this term, which I didn't realize before. This is that whole imposter syndrome. And so many people have mentioned that it's like, I'm not good enough to do this, or I'm not good enough to charge them X amount of, whatever medical aid is paying right now. And, because I don't think that, I don't want to ask them for money because I don't know if they're going to come back. And it's interesting, hearing those thoughts. But it's pretty much, what you said. Do you resonate with that?
100%. I think imposter syndrome is definitely something many of us face. We question our abilities, we question how we handle stuff. I think also because our field is not as straightforward. So it's not necessarily always, okay, we had the session, here's the result, your back pain's gone, or this is gone. Sometimes our results are more long-term and more complex. So it's easy to start going, am I doing anything? Am I helping? And yeah, I think also when you see how people maybe look at you, or the kind of questions they ask you, have you got all the qualifications, things like that, because maybe they assume you're too young, or things like that. And it does make you doubt yourself. But at the end of the day, having gone through this process and, it's so important to have your own sense of self-worth. You wouldn't be here if you're not capable of being here. It's such a tough process. And if you weren't made for it, I really feel you might have fallen out along the journey. So getting here shows that you are worth it. You can do it. We are not perfect beings. A psychologist is not this magical person who knows all the answers, can tell you exactly what to do. And I think we've got to take that pressure off ourselves. Or it's also what's our responsibility and what's our client's responsibility is quite a big one. So yeah, I think it's normal to have doubts, but I also think the doubts are what make us sure that we're working hard and we're becoming the best person, make sure that we are developing further, adding to our skill set, learning more where maybe we don't know enough, or making sure that if we maybe get a client with something we haven't experienced yet, getting supervision, seeing if there's further training, what material can you read. So I think that imposter syndrome or those self-doubts can fuel you to make you a better professional. But it's important not to let it affect your self-worth, because also we are people outside of being psychologists, and being a psychologist is not everything as to who we are. Need to be more than that.
Yeah, and I think it might have been an industry norm kind of thing. There was a, but many of the practitioners that we had on recently, they always spoke about that authentic self as well. Like people actually realize, and I think that's the reason I'm actually feeling quite, we feel quite grateful that we can have these stories, like out there, is that people don't realize that when psychologists actually go into their internship in community service and even their first job maybe, is that you haven't come across every single scenario. It's not like accountants where you've done trial balance, profit and loss, like balance sheet, and you know how those things work. Every person is different, so when you're going into internship, they just like put you out there, they give you a supervisor, but you're pretty much dealing with patients, and you have to like figure it out. And the other thing that psychologists told me is like, and most healthcare practitioners, is that you learn from patients. I think people don't realize that as well. Like we spoke about gender identity, and the psychologist told us, it's like, this stuff is new. It's like, it's almost evolving as we go along. There's a new type of, like identity, that's kind of coming out, and they have to learn about it and know how it fits into the other modalities and how they can fit that with the other experiences that they've had with other patients. So it's not a binary, like 0, 1, like this is how it works. Unlike that pure science thing, like mathematicians or stuff like that. Definitely not that. But I love that. I love how you're handling your private practice. I do want to ask this because this is where the wheels come unstuck normally. Is that, do you find private practice exactly as you imagined it to be and what you were trained to believe around it?
Yes and no. I think some of the more positive things, like being able to run your own hours, make your own choices, decorate your own office, things like that are wonderful and I enjoy. But I think something that's missing from all of healthcare practitioners' sort of programs that we study is business management. We have absolutely no training in how to run a business whatsoever. And now suddenly you're a business owner, and now you need to market, you need to manage taxes, you need to do invoicing. You're becoming, a receptionist, admin specialist, you're becoming a marketing expert, an advertiser, so many different hats. And especially when you start out, it's all on you. And we don't have all those skills. So, designing websites, social media marketing, there's so many different things to consider. So I think that has been the challenge for me is not being proficient in all those fields and now having to do it. And of course, wanting to do it to my best abilities. But when you start out, you also don't have the biggest cash flow. So you can't also afford to just hire experts in all these fields. That sort of comes a bit maybe with time. So I think that's been a bit of maybe what I haven't expected is just the various components, and never being trained in those makes it difficult.
I'm glad you said that. We had a educational psychologist on, and he said he actually loved the marketing aspect. He loved this aspect of, like almost like constantly figuring out these things. But the important point around that is you have to be of that mindset, of like you. Exactly, as we spoke about imposter syndrome. Maybe it's like you don't know all the answers. You just have to like slowly plug away at it and know what you're looking for. Firstly, if you're struggling with billing, like how do you fix that? Hopefully, if you're struggling with unpaid, how do you fix that? If you're struggling with getting clients, I think one of the practitioners said it nicely when she said it's not just about getting clients as well. It's about keeping them. And I think especially with psychologists, that's an important thing. But if you get clients and like the clients are not staying on for a longer time, and I'm not saying you want to, this is where the ethical part comes in. I'm not saying you just like, hold them down and like say, you have to stay with me, but there's a reason people come to see you. And, if you're finding that you're dropping those clients and they're seeing someone else, then there's something, you're probably not doing right. And I think they don't speak about that as much. That's a very business orientated concept, but it's something that you always have to have at the back of your mind. Have you found that as well?
Definitely. I think, I'm part of this mentorship group with Jeannie Cavea, and she talks about getting clients, keeping clients, and what's the other one? Something to do with that. If I remember, I'll add to it. But it's a huge component of the practice, because you spend so much time and money marketing, trying to reach new people, responding to referrals, putting yourself out there. But if you're not actually retaining the clients, of course, ethically, when they need support, it's not really helping build your practice. And I think there's two components to it. It either could be a problem in your business management. If you are too difficult to get hold of, if you are unreliable in how you maybe respond to your clients, if you don't have, a place where they're secure, space where they feel comfortable coming to, things like that can hold a person from coming back. If you don't feel comfortable, if you don't feel like this is a proper, legit sort of space, and if they don't feel like they can communicate with you, or they just feel like you're messing them around, you're not reliable, that's one aspect that I think can deter a client from coming back. On the other hand, you also have your personal skills. And that's why I think we as psychologists, always are striving to improve ourselves, improve who we are. But I think the key to any therapy, no matter what approach you use, techniques, and research will back this, is your relationship with your client. If you do not make someone feel safe, heard, validated, if you do not show empathy for them, if you're not genuine and true to who you are, nothing else can really take place, and people will not feel safe coming back. So I think the importance of that is just massive.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned Jeannie Cavey. I have a huge amount of respect for her as a practitioner and someone that runs a really big practice. I'm glad she's a mentor. She's actually the one that mentioned it. So I do, because it was a recent episode, I remember that. I didn't mention her name, but I'm glad you mentioned it. Because yeah, that's exactly what she said. And I think she was one of the few that actually mentioned it in that way. It was about getting the clients. It's about, keeping the clients, as in helping them through whatever they're dealing with. And then after that, being top of mind as well. So that, if they are struggling, because not everyone is going to be in therapy for 5 years, right? But they, work through a problem. But the next time something comes up, hopefully, they say, I want to contact Emma, rather than going on to a directory and saying, okay, can I find another psychologist in my suburb? And I think that's a key point, around having that business hat on. Yeah, I think she articulated that really well. So I think if you want to listen to it as well, anyone listening to this, I think, listen to that episode where she kind of covers that almost methodology, which I really like. I think I want to ask you this. I ask all of the practitioners purely, and it's kind of selfish in some ways, but in other ways, it's about us helping maybe more practitioners. And when we started probably about 8 years ago in the industry, we came up with a software, to help people or practitioners do billing and appointment scheduling and just submission to medical aids. It evolved since then, so we started doing a lot more of the business functions, but all using a software, to do it, or a managed service. And what I found over that time was there were either practitioners that could afford, obviously what we were offering, or they couldn't. And it always made me, it was always difficult, telling a practitioner, actually, we're not gonna drop the pricing, because, obviously we're dealing with the same type of practitioners. And the last thing we want to hear is a practitioner at a CPD conference saying, oh, by the way, I used the software, and, would you believe it only cost X, and the other person is paying maybe more. And it was all, that's the reason we couldn't ever do that. But in the last few episodes, practitioners always said it's almost like if you could help practitioners as they're starting out, maybe, just having the software, but at a different pricing point. So same, have the whole functionality, but at a different pricing point, almost to help them through that process. Do you think
Mm,
something like that would be valuable? Because we know, I mean, having the software or the service is going to help practitioners to get through
mm.
certain levels. But when they get to that level, and then they pay, the maybe the normal subscription price. Do you think something like that will help practitioners and the industry?
I think it definitely would. I think if I look at my own sort of practice, I agree. When you start out, you can't sort of spend money on everything, and you have to sort of prioritize what is absolutely essential. And you start thinking, when it's still a manageable size, you can do those functions on your own. As it grows, it becomes more challenging. I think also for many of us who maybe are not familiar with sort of technology and accounting software, it can also be intimidating to use a new platform and manage it. Yeah, there's a whole lot there, but I think it could be very beneficial. I've also wondered, I also think in if even if I look at therapy, I wish we could offer sort of discounts, and I wish we could offer, maybe people in their first time, or people who are struggling, or students, something like that. But I know, as Jeannie says to me, I think it's called carpetious billing. There's some legal reason why we can't offer things like that. So I'm not the expert on that, really not.
Hmm.
But I agree with you, the benefits would just be massive. And then I'm sure the practitioners would be so grateful to have that starting out, that as they build, they'd be more than happy to pay the full price when they get to that point.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, and I asked the question, and it even as I ask it, it seems like the most logical thing,
Mm,
that someone would say yes, obviously that works. But what we found is, I mean, we've got clients for like over 8 years, and
mm,
what we find is like, once they believe in some like a system, and they believe in some solution, I mean, they're going to use that for most of their private practice, and that's
mm,
good. But the point I want to make with it is that the flip side is that if we didn't go down that route, is we find many practitioners didn't just kind of cobble these systems together. They try to find, what is free for a year, can I do that?
mm,
And then worst case scenario, they keep on using Excel or Word, to do their invoices on a
mm,
Sunday night. They don't manage the calendars better. Where we started evolving to in the last few years was almost like having like a digital assistant, that does your unpaids and your medical aid follow-ups and stuff like that. And so if we could almost like put that into a box. Online learning is another one. And I think
mm,
Jeannie is big into that right now. But having an online learning types software where you can almost like manage these courses and get people onto it, get people paying for it, all of those things. That's kind of the space that we're in right now. And I just think that there's definitely value add for almost like putting that in a box and saying, okay,
mm,
use it. Like, I also don't want to restrict it. There's many software providers that say you can only use it for 10 clients. I don't know, it just doesn't resonate with us. Whereas I think, just use it, whatever that pricing is, and then when your practice gets better, then hopefully you pay us the full subscription.
mm.
um yeah, but I'm glad you said that. um, we do have to start wrapping up soon. I do want to ask, is there any challenges that you found other than what we spoke about now, um,
Mm.
that people don't mention? The one that always screams to mind is unpaids. Practitioners don't seem to understand that once you send an invoice, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get paid. But is there
Yeah.
anything like that?
I think on my side, in terms of maybe debt, and unpaid invoices, I've sort of set up my practice on a cash basis. So I expect clients to pay after the session. And I think that's really helped with that. And I provide an invoice that can be then used for medical aid, and they are paid back. I think that's eliminated a lot of that for me. But at the same time, I do want to still help clients who maybe have to use a medical aid, or if we want to go through a PMB process. So you can't completely eliminate that. What I do have is in my informed consent, it explains my debt collection process, so that any client would have signed and agreed to that. So if it is necessary, I can contact a debt collector, and I at least have their consent for me to do that. Luckily, I have not had to use that. But I think it's important to cover ourselves. And we don't really think about this in our intake, in the sort of forms you ask people to sign. You ask for their details, but you don't think to explain to them, what all these things mean. So I think that's something I think is so important. In terms of anything else that's maybe surprised me in private practice, I just think one of the biggest lessons I've learned is networking. Building a trusted referral network is absolutely key. And the more you can build good relationships with other practitioners, they can refer, in good mind and trust you with clients or patients. And that, of course, helps build your practice. And you have the same. You also have a connection that you can trust. My private practice is in a medical center, and there's lots of other health practitioners, including an educational psychologist and psychiatrist. And it's so nice to have a sort of team to work with. And I think while you do need, practitioners in your specific field, it's also good to connect with others. And in addition to that, I think it adds for your own emotional support, because I think private practice is lonely and there are challenges. But if you have someone else who's going through it, it's great. Social support, emotional support from other practitioners is really important.
Yeah, I think it's that human factor. Hey, in business, it's called like know, like, and trust. If other practitioners don't know, like, and trust you, I mean, I think it's very unlikely that they're going to be referring. And I think the other concept is, which is what you just said. Now, there's something cool about that multidisciplinary approach. There's something cool about like discussing a patient from multiple aspects. And I find this especially in the pediatric aspects, where there's an OT and a physio and a speech therapist and a GP, and they're all like collaborating on how to help their client better. There's something really nice about that. And, and I think that's what, that's what you were saying as well, is it's nice to look at it from different aspects. And it's a human factor. That's how we wired. We do want that human factor part.
Definitely.
My last question is there anything, because obviously we're trying to cover this in the best way we can, but is there anything around being a psychologist or being in private practice that you thought I should have asked you that I didn't? And maybe also if there's any books, that you can recommend. Is there anything like that?
I think I don't think there's anything else specifically about private practice. I think if I want to give, if it's all right, just to maybe give advice to any new psychologists going into practice, I think, like I've shown, I like to be prepared for these things. So prepare for private practice even before you get into masters, because I think many psychologists don't really see themselves in private practice. It might not be your first sort of goal or your first job that you see for yourself. But I don't want to say there are limited job opportunities for psychologists, because there are job opportunities. But oftentimes psychologists go into private practice maybe because the job opportunities aren't for their category, or they can't find in an area that they want to work at. So I just want to recommend that people consider it as a thought, because it may not have been your first sort of wish for yourself, or your first goal in your field, but it's often something that we have to explore due to just many factors. So, and when I say that, consider maybe saving up some money for starting a practice, having some sort of money to start off when you begin. Mentorship, if you can. There's lots of wonderful psychologists at the moment offering mentorship to psychologists starting in private practice, Jeannie being one of them, and Nikki Arbador being another. They run mentorship groups, there's Facebook groups. So connect with others, learn from them. You will make mistakes as you go, but the better you can prepare yourself with this guidance and having some money saved up, because of course there is a cost involved, I think will make the transition a bit smoother. So I think that would be my advice going forward. I think some of the books I've already talked about, like The Gift for Therapy and Man's Search for Meaning, or The Choice, are wonderful books for anyone in this field. So they're also helpful in your own personal mission in becoming a psychologist.
That's amazing. Thanks, Emma. Thanks for your time. Thanks for doing this. And I think we covered some really cool topics that or points that we didn't cover in previous episodes. So I think this is going to be one of those amazing episodes for anyone looking to be a psychologist, as well as, going into private practice. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. As always, stay tuned and we'll speak to you in the next episode.